all the way down. So the sense is, as you say, that we're doing a lot of this wonderful outreach, and I see some of these programs, and they're spectacular, and they're fabulous. My question is, why doesn't it show up in the population?
Because, look, I mean, think about it practically. If you're, there are a lot of students who decide at some point that they don't want to get their PhD, that they want to stop at the MA level. I get that all the time because they want to go into communication and they have a great passion for it. Those people are out there a lot, but they can't at the same time.
No, I'm sorry. What I'm saying, I don't want your people to come and work for me.
Yeah, I know.
What I'm saying is, I want your people to go out into the schools and stimulate other kids who go and get PhDs.
Not really, yeah.
And so, what you're saying is, you don't think that that's your job?
No, not at all. I'm saying it's not that an attractive career path for somebody.
Okay, so what you're really saying is that you're doing all of this work on outreach in science, but actually creating professional scientists at the end isn't really a worthwhile thing to do because it isn't an attractive career path.
If they're going to do research, it is. If they're going to do media and outreach, they take a different...
I guess I don't want to look at that stage where somebody's trying to decide whether they want to do outreach or teaching or science. I'm saying that the goal of an engagement and outreach program should be to generate more people who come in not to do science communication, although many of them will, but actually also to do science.
I'm not sure I think we've broken that into two separate areas here. There's an educational aspect and an engagement aspect, and I work very hard to keep those separate. I'm not involved in the education aspect. I'm not an educator. I do teach college courses. I'm not going to do any better than I see the other educators do. What I'm interested in doing is the engagement part. But we have people here that are very committed to the educational aspect, and I respect that, and I want them to continue to do it, but I think those things are separate. Just like the Forum on Education is separate than the Forum on Outreach and Engaging the Public. And so I think that if you mix these together, it gets very confusing.
But then can I come back to your first question, which is a very good one, which is outcomes. What do you think are appropriate outcomes of engagement?
What do I think? Yeah. I will tell you what I think. I think having my altogether long-term goal for a perfect world is have a small fraction of our population have some idea what scientific method is. That would be my long overreaching goal. Have some appreciation that there is a process, there is scientific method, and you can ask certain questions. That's too vague, I realize, but I think
it's not so vague.
But I think the idea, I mean, we've had kids in the schools, and you take your kid into the school, and they're still teaching intelligent design in Urbana, Illinois, and they say, "Oh, you're a scientist? Oh, you must be so smart. I could never do science." My kids' third grade teachers. This is common. Who you meet on airplanes. So just a general raising of the level to me, it's more important than even the educational aspect. Just a general raising of level that there is a process of scientific method, and you can come to conclusions. So in other words, the famous book for 30 years old, The Medium, the Mystic, and the Physicist, that you can actually get to some conclusions, not through mysticism, but through scientific method.
But in fact, wouldn't you imagine, however, that as a spin-off of doing all of that, by accident perhaps,
yes,
some of that would then trickle down, and there would actually be more kids who, in fact, want to study
Absolutely.
science.
Absolutely.
And so this is what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that despite the fact that all of this wonderful stuff is going on, I don't see any evidence that the pipeline is growing.
Well, no, but the pipeline is really squelched in our society. When we look at what's being done offshore, we've squelched all of our dark matter research, our high energy physics research. It's gone. Okay? As you know, the Energy Frontier Research Centers is $777 million over 5 years. That changed the face of American science. It's a drop, not even a drop in the bucket. It's nothing. It's nothing. So we're not funding science in this country, and so people aren't going into it. It's not a respectable mode of employment, and that's the problem with that. And I'm not going to address that in this meeting.
Look, I'm sorry. Basic Energy Science is throwing $1.7 billion of science funding. That's actually a lot of money. And I will say the problem is hiring people to do it.
And I think part of the problem is something that I don't think has been mentioned today, maybe it's been mentioned at the previous days, is the low status, low pay, low qualifications, which is all linked to this low status and low pay of teachers. I mean, I think we really have
Yeah, I
to
agree with that
ensure,
too.
and that was part of my let's encourage undergraduates, graduate students to become teachers, because I think we really need teachers teaching physics who did physics at university.
And then we see Mike Lamb's
Because
statistics.
otherwise, you know, the kids, you do outreach, the kid goes, wow, physics is boom, explosions. And, you know, they need something beyond that. They need basic physics taught to them by physicists, I think, at
Peter,
school, and we don't have it. And so I think that's one of the major problems.
I think you and Casey were not really communicating with each other. And I'm not going to try to
Yeah.
mediate, I'm not going to be an exchange boson to improve your communication. I suggest you meet at the coffee break and you talk it through and you
No, I think there are
discover
issues that a lot of
you're
people
after
are.
absolutely the same thing. Now, what is so clear, Peter, is in looking for outcomes, evidence-based outcomes, the whole enterprise isn't driven by our desire as scientists, which most of us in the room are, or informal science educators. It's not driven by what we're able to do. It's being driven by much larger forces. And Rosie started with the notion, hey, if we don't have some impact on those larger forces, we aren't going to make substantial progress. So what to me is fascinating about one of the unexpected outcomes of this meeting is that we do have a crack at those larger forces. We have, because of the people who were here and because of the quality of the discussion that took place here, we have a crack at influencing what our current administration will do if they are re-elected. We have a real crack at that, and we have a crack at impacting the National Science Foundation, not through so much through program officers, but through an informed National Science Board, which realizes that there are absolutely huge holes in what NSF is doing. Now, unfortunately, the DOE has nothing remotely resembling the National Science Board. There is no group you can go to of scientists or public spirited citizens analogous to the National Science Board, which could have any impact at all on what the DOE does, right?
Well, it's difficult to have any impact on the DOE. But the thing about the DOE, you can actually go to the Secretary of Energy.
Yes.
I mean, it's a cabinet office, right? So that it's in many ways it ought to be easier.
It ought to be easier, but what the Secretary of Energy discovered from day one almost is that his ability to influence the Congress depended entirely on his personally getting to know the power structure in the Congress. And he started off on totally the wrong foot by sending a number 3 and number 4 person, and the fiefdoms reacted. They reacted instantly and viciously, and so Bell Lablet's starting out as a grand program for 8 was down to 2 before it ever got started.
I want to hear more about this.
What?
I don't know about this. I want to hear more about it.
So, Mark suggested I show some of the AIP data on degree production.
Yeah.
So it's not the best way to display this, but what we're finding in the class of 2011 is expected to go up even more. This is bachelor's degrees,
Right.
and they're at an all-time high.
Okay.
Where's the dip, Bo?
Huh? The dip is 2002 or so.
Okay.
So in 2002 it was around 3,800, and we're now above 6,000.
So this is what we see at the university. Why does that happen?
We don't really know why it's been happening. I mean,
Yeah.
a lot
I mean,
of...
so
There's research in the environmental ed industry. Environmental ed
Yeah.
degrees and declared majors in those related fields is booming.
yeah.
And the research indicates that it relates to a whole bunch of really angry 20-somethings a number of years ago with the Bush administration. Huh,
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah, maybe.
And think about the issue that if
Sure.
you're really
Well,
motivated about
yeah.
sustainability, and you're really concerned about the future.
Could you elaborate on that a little bit? I'm
Well,
not
let me
sure I
just finish this so we have some data to talk about. I think in physics, a lot of it has to do with a lot of the work that's been going on with the spin-up report that was back in the
Oh, yeah.
late 90s. A lot of physics department reform was going on in science, in physics education reform, the kind of stuff that Stephanie and her colleagues work on. So I think the climate in departments is changing significantly, which helps attract students. And then this is PhDs conferred, again, all-time high, and it's about 50-50 US versus foreign PhDs right now. So
It's about what, I'm sorry.
50-50, nearing parity.
So what's the number of PhDs produced every year?
It's about 1,600.
Yeah,
So
so-
about 800 of those
Right.
are,
Yeah. No, but actually,
it's not a lot.
No, but we see the interesting thing is that how many PhDs does Argonne want to hire every year? About 200-300.
Across the board, all sciences.
Well, this is all sciences, but actually Argonne it's very heavily, at Argonne it will be very heavily physics dominated. I mean, it will be so.
So you would like to hire, say, 80 physics PhDs a year?
Yeah, something like that. No,
So essentially 10% of the available output.
Yeah.
You would like to.
So it turns out. I mean, so I'm saying that there is a problem actually and.
But I mean.
So that's why.
to
So
the extent-
the average age of. So interesting. The average age of the physics division at Argonne is over 50.
Same thing
Young.
is true of physics teachers.
Right. So and the reason is that we go out and we advertise and we can't succeed in hiring people.
And Peter, I would suggest looking at environmental ed, when I entered in the early mid-'80s, nobody was getting advanced degrees because that wasn't going to get you a job.
Yeah.
You had to have skills. And it was all about your experience, your capacity to make it happen. And that outreach, that engagement to the public, and yet almost everyone had science degrees, typically in natural sciences, just didn't really want to teach in a classroom.
Yeah.
Is essentially what it grew out of. And it took a number of years to eventually hire those people, find enough career path, but you never made as much money. And still, the environmental industry is underpaid dramatically compared to being a formal classroom teacher. But those people care about what they do. Often the interest is sustainability and linking more kids. They have fun with it. And then now, eventually, those degrees begin to develop. And now you can get a doctorate in environmental ed and a PhD, et cetera. So I think it will come, but it may be, my point being that to get people who are good at engagement, I may need to step down from that academic degree and put more weight in their ability and their pedagogy skills to deliver.
So why do you think you can't hire people?
Well, but I just know in practice they're not good enough.
In physics?
Yeah, in physics. I mean, you see, there's this strange myth, and I actually get this. I actually get this from. I've had this also from many of my colleagues who say, "Well, I don't want to take too many graduate students because it's really hard for them to get jobs." And what they mean by that is that getting a professorship at a major university replacing them. And so, of course, that is clear because because a typical academic will have 30 graduate students through their career, and at the end of that, they retire and there's one job. So there's kind of 1 in 30 chance of the replacement, and if that's what you strive for. But but there are these slightly lower class jobs, and indeed, Argonne is one of those places that you go to if you can't get a job in Chicago or something like that.
And there's that much of it. So
And we pay better.
so
It turns out. So it isn't by the way that we're paying badly.
Right.
We actually pay better typically than a starting salary at a university.
Yeah, but we get to hire and you don't, so there.
Well, yeah.
Yeah, but that's back to what I was saying earlier.
Well, I've got a sneaky
Maybe
trick.
you do.
Yeah,
One thing to consider, because in my classes I get a lot of PhD students who
Sure.
are some of them waivers, some of them go on to be research scientists and communicators, some of them don't. Even within the field of physics, a lot of people have this idea that people stop short of the PhD because, I don't know, they're stupid or lazy or whatever. The real reason is they're bored because they're stuck in a small area, and they're curious and they want to know about everything. So at that point, they make this decision that, you know what, I'd rather be doing a job where I can still be an expert in my field, but I get to do a lot of other things.
Well, indeed, so that's another reason they should be coming to Argonne, because of course Argonne.
They should be coming to Argonne.
Well, no, but I mean, so, I suppose, but there's I'm sorry, I'm not trying to just sort of put. No, but the I mean, look, I agree with you. I mean, I actually think that as physicists we do a very bad job at bringing those class of students through, which is why I would argue that at the level of graduate programs, we need to have a much more diverse set of things that people will do.
And we need to stop this.
And because in the end, I mean, in fact, I have a problem this year, just personally. I have 2 postdoc jobs and I've not been able to fill them. I have had a lot of really high-class applications. All of them want to work on topological insulators. That's the hot topic this year, and if you're not working on topological insulators, you won't get a faculty position at Harvard. I've probably had 100 PhD applications saying I want to work on topological insulators. I actually don't want that. I want something a little bit more mundane.
You mean realistic?
Well, I don't know. Look, I'm not going to comment on that. No, but there's a huge mismatch even there between what the universities are actually supplying in terms of skills.
Yeah.
And what I would like, I mean, I would actually like some kid who could walk in and say, you know, we have a problem over there, why don't you go think about that? And let them wander around, find some stuff, and we're doing, of course, work which is generically much more applied. I think the students that you see who say, really, I'm getting bored here because I'm being sharpened to a point, would probably like that kind of environment.
They'd love it.
Because they will be given a real problem.
But and you know what the problem is? There are very few people in the physics department at USC who are capable of providing that kind of mentorship. It is a person problem, it in part is a field problem. As I look at our mutual field, it is a disaster that all of these kids want to work on topological insulators.
I'm not
it's
knocking
utterly
topology.
absurd.
Yes.
It's as absurd as what's happened to particle theory, all these kids who want to work on string theory. Somehow or other, the system has gotten tilted in ways that we do not understand. And we're now digressing
This is a depression.
totally
But I think
from
that
the subject, but it's something we all care a lot about.
But I think there's still the basic point, as you're saying, more or less, that, and as I said earlier, physics faculty, a lot of them do have this, which I think a bad attitude, that you fail if you don't turn in to meet.
Right.
And we really have to make much bigger effort to encourage our students that,
so
you know,
you're
think
now
of
asked
broad career paths,
So
because that's
let's,
part of engagement.
So let's ask, how can you bring about the phase change in university faculty? One possibility is a phase change in the people who are hiring the faculty. What are they looking for? And you say, well, how do I do that? Well, that could be either a bottom-up approach in which a field realizes, hey, we are screwing up big time because of the kinds of people we're educating, and there's no hope, etc. Or it could be a top-down approach. My guess is if what is ever to bring about that change, it's got to be some mixture of the two, and it has to be a lot of free, frank, and friendly discussions of the kind that you and Casey have just been having. We've all been having.
I'm very good at frank discussions.
If I could just make
Yeah.
a comment about David's point, but I'd like to back off if I may to sort of talk more about the cultural issues. I don't think universities have to back off from their fundamental missions. I mean, our fundamental missions as universities are to create knowledge, to push the boundaries for the long term of the human endeavor. It is not to prepare people to get jobs per se, although that's a nice outcome of the whole thing. But, you know, we're a value-based institution. In that, at least among the elite research universities. So the part of that issue, it seems to me, in terms of the cultural identification that you've made of these barriers, is that we see as universities our goal is to teach people to think, to solve problems, to contribute to society, whether it be through the long-term creation of knowledge or through the exercise of their skills in ways that benefit society directly, then in principle, different pathways of the sort you're talking about, KC, or into universities or national labs are all consonant with the fundamental approaches we're trying to make. Now, that is not to underestimate the fact that there are cultural obstacles in terms of the fact that people want to recreate what they do. You know, I mean, this is the professor syndrome and all that, but I don't think there's a fundamental intellectual barrier, that there is a cultural barrier, and that takes attention. So, in some ways, despite the sort of dyspeptic view of the narrowness of universities, we're actually well positioned, given what our fundamental mission is to be able to help this, but it takes a lot of attention in those conversations I'm talking about. So that's one cultural aspect, but I thought, if I may, just one other thing that struck me in terms of culture here is that, and this was true in our Chicago meeting as well, there are so many incredible efforts going on that we learn about, and you were pointing out the Alan Alda one, which I hadn't heard of, which doesn't mean anything, but you know, these keep popping up. People have spent an enormous amount of time, whether it's Fermilab or others. As scientists, we are all eager to try different things. I mean, that's fun. We love to invent things. We like to do some research, but you know, it's more fun to go in and do it. And the question is, are we now at the point where we really should be distilling? There was a suggestion yesterday about a scientific journal on this. I mean, how do we get the definitive list, if you will, of best practices? Just putting up a website, I'm sort of, I must confess, to be pessimistic, because there's so many websites, although that's a necessary adjunct to whatever one does. And I wonder if there isn't a cultural issue here, too, about the fact that maybe it's time to back off from producing new approaches. Not, I hate to say that's an academic, but, and we should always produce some new approaches, but can we make a bigger contribution by trying to distill what works, or the elements of what works? And then try to apply that and then measure it, so we see whether our outcomes pipeline increase, breadth of the pipeline, numbers in the pipeline, whether it's training people in general to think along a scientific way so that they can use those skills in whatever path they go. I mean, you can define a whole series of metrics, all of which are valuable, but presumably there are common principles and common approaches that have actually been worked out already. You don't have to invent. So I don't know how to do it necessarily, but it strikes me that that's a cultural shift.
Tom, I think you raise a fascinating question. If we imagine, fast forward, that there is such a thing as a science of communication or a science of engagement, then you want to have a journal which goes along with that, just as we have journals in physics, chemistry, and now lots of environmental journals, etc. So maybe one thing we should really be seriously thinking about is starting a journal which has to do with the Journal of Engagement Experiments, Journal of Experiments, something like, in which people can write about what they've done. It has editors. People look at the things that are sent in, not everything gets published. It should be online so that it doesn't cost anything, etc. Julianne, what do you think of that?
Yeah, I think that would be marvelous for two reasons. First is that it worked in other fields. Take, for example, art and science. It was an emerging field, and then they created some specific journals where they had the ability to publish, to have peer review referring, etc. And it helps a lot to distinguish between things which do not work and things which work and the scale of them. It's also very helpful when you want to find foundings and for your own universities to show what you've done. Also, I think that would work easily because we scientists are used to that. We are used to the process of submitting, of having referees, etc. So that would go along. Now, the question we had in our group yesterday was whether we should do a journal for each disciplinary area, physics, chemistry, etc., or common journal. I think a common journal will not work at the beginning because I think we are not a community in between the disciplinary. Whereas if APS or AIP would add a section to an existing journal like American Journal of Physics or other issues, or creating a small online section, at least in the physics community, that would work. Because I'm subscribing already to the APS website, I'm going to that website already, so my colleagues would understand if I was to submit an article there, it would be the same page as the peer-read article, so it would make a difference on my side.
Let me just, I'll come back to you in a second. I want to pursue that a minute. I'm looking at you, I'm looking at Dan, I'm looking at Marge. You are all involved in really fascinating initiatives in engagement that can change science education, to pick up on our theme. What kind of journal would you like to publish in, and should it be, again, is there enough engagement in physics that you have a journal for physics engagement, or should it be a journal of science engagement? That's the issue you raise. But really the issue is, are you eager to see such a medium of communication form, sufficiently eager that you'd be willing to write for the first issue? That would be my...
Let me just...
So, let me just call for a show of hands. How many of you would be willing to write for the first issue of Journal of X?
We don't know where to publish what we would like
So
to publish.
that's what we had done practicing.
I think that's a great start. And Dan, you were too busy fooling with your iPhone.
No, I was not going to volunteer for this.
No, but what we discussed was that there'll be a FOEP newsletter and see how that grows, and out of that we'll...
Actually, what I was writing was a note so Laura and I have another meeting for this forum on outreach and engaging the public that we're having a meeting on. And one of the things that we need to address in this is that we're developing a newsletter,
right,
and what should be in there. And I think this is the sort of thing that would be excellent. So rather than a referee publication, have
This I have to object. I think these are two different things.
Yes,
the newsletter
right.
is very nice to have that. Our two issues here are first sustainability, and websites do not work. I mean, we know that for sure. A common website with links, it never works. We tried that in France 10 times, it never works. Whereas a published paper, I mean, I can find the PRL of the beginning of the century easily online, and I know it is there, and I have a reference, etc., etc. So I think these are two very important things to do, newsletter for sure. But what I'm talking about is really different here. Is the real process we are used as scientists is to have the referring process and to have a publication somewhere. It doesn't need to be a big journal. It could be a section of an existing journal perhaps, or something like that, or perhaps 5 articles per issue. I don't know, but I think these are two different things.
But it would have
they are different things. And I'm so encouraged because I could see 3 articles. I could even see the beginning of the journal. And presumably what each of you would write, you describe what you're doing, what has worked, why you think it's worked, what its effectiveness is, and what you think interesting next steps might be, just as you would describe the results of any other experiment. And
How many
that,
major
in a
success
sense, is
stories?
the idea, right?
I'm not sure what I do as an experiment, and so the experimental model of a paper works. So, for example, I and two colleagues just published an article in the Journal of Nuclear Science or whatever. But it was about education results, and they asked for evidence for effective practices, and we wrote that paper. But it didn't have things about what next or, unanswered questions. So it's a little different, and it may be even a little more different for outreach, which is a more, squishy title.
But I suppose the argument really for a journal is that a journal begins to define the discipline.
Right.
By making it a discipline which actually forces questions like, what are the outcomes? I mean, so forcing a level of thought.
That's the difference between the journal and the newsletter.
Yeah, you're completely right. It obliges us to find criteria. And as you're going to referee a paper, you need to decide on what.
That's right. And so the community will do that.
Exactly.
The community will develop the criteria by which it would operate.
But in Minnesota, it grew out of the Science Teachers Association, Environmental Ed, that now has a Journal of Environmental Education that is nationwide and international. In that sense, it all grew out of the Science Teachers Associations getting a track or a group, and at conferences having a track of presentations that really were just simply people in leadership positions in Science Teachers Associations that wanted to do more outdoor public engagement aspects. And eventually that group of people split off to create an association of environmental education. If APS or AI, American Institute of Physics, if they can get sort of leadership to support or promote within those organizations, and the forums are already going, that it strikes me that energy is moving that direction. It's then at conferences to create a track and say, we want to invite people for presentations. We want to invite people who are educators who may not be classic scientists as much as they're classic educators with good science skill. That may be a way to grow a professional society that then can eventually split off to have a strong level of engagement for physics.
So to put it in another way, that what we've mostly been talking about in this group is community creation, but now we've sort of shifted discipline creation, which is a different thing.
But does the discipline creation begin with the solid community creation?
The question is, how deep is the community, right? Is this enough? So Bo, if you took the American Journal of Physics, for example, would they be willing to publish articles of this type in that journal?
I don't know. Maybe, but with the right pressure.
That would be,
I think it would be better.
Because then we don't have to have 200 papers a year or 50 papers a year.
It could be a section of PERST, Physics Education Research Special Topics, which is an online-only open, I believe it's open access journal that's part of PhysRed. Or it could be a joint project between AIP and APS.
Do y'all control the physics teacher?
No, that's AAPT.
I think to even think about organization of this.
My fellow panelists
Into
just
journals of
left, but
different-
it reminds me, it is 10:30.
Exactly, that's right.
And we agreed to stop at 10:30. So let's do that, continue these conversations over coffee, and we'll be back at 11.
Like that, so why on earth would you want to? Also, because I can't do it word in edgewise, but there are journals on science and PhD and there are PhD programs.